Welcome to this podcast interview. We are really excited to have Annemieke Romein with us today. She's here to talk about Transcribes. Transcribes is an important private initiative that can help people analyze historical documents. It's great for researchers in the humanities, but also for anyone who wants to work with all kinds of text data. Let's start with the basics. What is Transcribes?
So Transcribes is a platform that allows for information extraction, and that information extraction is aided by machine learning. So what it does is you can upload your documents, and those are documents handwritten or printed, and they can be very old, from medieval times or maybe even earlier, or modern letters that your college, your notes from lectures, whatever you would prefer, and you can upload them there. And within the platform there are various options. So one of the most used options is that you upload your files and then you check whether there is a model that may be somehow fitting to your needs to recognize this text. And that can be that your 17th century German text need to be recognized, and well, you know, it's kind of a tedious job to transcribe these texts manually. So you check out whether there might be a model available that caters for your needs. And well, there happen to be quite a lot of 17th century German models. And then you run that over a couple of pages and you check whether it does the job that it's supposed to do, mainly transcribe your text. And you might want to correct some pages and then build your own model that might be even more suitable for your type of text. So then you only need to correct. But if you happen to have a text from a region that is far less studied, so it could be Retro-Romanian from the Swiss Alps, which is far less researched, far less sources, of course. Then you might want to, or might need to, train your own model to entirely recognize that. So then you need to transcribe about 30 to 50 pages. So that means you literally have to make a transcription of those texts. But then you can train or have the computer train a model that then is focused on your text. It basically checks the wobbly things on the page and compares it to your transcription, learns from it and builds a model. And then you can run it over the rest of the text to transcribe that, so make it into a machine readable text, and with that make it available to a larger audience if that is what you want. But you can also Control F search through your document to find whatever information you need. So the Transcribes platform then helps you to guide you through that process without having to learn how to program. You have this graphic user interface that allows you to just click buttons, and the whole process behind it, the programming part, is basically managed within the platform itself, and then allows you to lean back and wait for your transcriptions to basically arrive, and then you can continue doing your research or reading through the text without getting a headache because of all the work that has to be poured into making the transcriptions itself.
That's very interesting. It sounds like a huge time saver, especially when it lets you focus on the analysis or maybe the text analysis instead of spending a lot of hours programming yourself. And actually building on that, Annemieke, why is AI such a good fit for analyzing historical documents?
Well, if an astronomer uses a telescope to watch for the night sky and discover stars that may not have been visible through the human eye, then using AI for historical documents allows us to study a vast amount of documents that would otherwise not be possible to read through within a lifetime, or within the period of time that is given for a project or a thesis or whatever. So it allows us to study much more texts, because we do not have to go to the or have to go less through the process of recognizing and reading the text. When you have an old document, you have to figure out what it says. You have to get accustomed to the handwriting, or the type of print that is being used, because that can be quite challenging for earlier periods of time. Then, when you have figured that out, how it was written or what it says, you have to figure out the words and get accustomed to the language. Well, when you have covered that, you might not be able to take everything in, or you may not have yet the right questions at hand, because there's an iterative process in doing research, because in another text you read something and then you look back and you think, oh, yes, somewhere in the left top corner of that book there was this information that kind of seems to be related, let's look it up. And you have to start again with figuring out the handwriting. And then it turns out it wasn't on the top left part, but somewhere at the end. And it cost days before you retrieved that little bit of information. But you did know what it was about. And if you can just search through the document or search through your files with a machine readable text, then it becomes much easier to find information, but you can also find patterns in text that were previously not possible. So when I read my 17th century texts that concern legislation in, for instance, Switzerland, then I can take 4,200 and something texts, and I can look for patterns. So I can look up which word was being used, how that word developed over time. So you can see the spelling variety, which is not really possible to do for 300 years if you have to do them manually, because it's a lot of text. You may not find that specific word through every text. So keeping that focus can be really challenging, whereas if you can do that with programming or with digital techniques, then it becomes much easier to keep that overview. You can also imagine that those doing research on the cargo of ships, they can have these tables and then they can create nice graphs out of it. You may only see those graphs in the end, but there's a lot of work being poured into it, from making transcriptions to going through to those graphs. And the machine readable part, or the AI in this really helps to recognize the text and then makes that translation to what the researcher can do with it. So it's a really helpful tool to get a hold of much more information and ask totally different questions than was previously possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, let's talk about how this can help researchers or practitioners. How can transcribers benefit people working in the humanities or maybe in the social sciences?
So, when you use transcribers, you can get access to a lot of material, and with such a platform, it also kind of concentrates everything, organizes your material, or actually you organize your material when you upload it. So it allows for you to read through so much more material, or at least have the computer read through it, because it also happens to be the case, of course, that you may upload 10,000 pages, but when you search through for certain keywords, you may end up with only 50 pages that were really relevant. but it really speeds up the process of being able to go through that material, compared to having to read through those 10,000 pages in the archive or in a library or wherever you found that material. And being able to access that so quickly can then shift your focus to really answering the questions instead of having to really do that groundwork, which is very important as well. But most historians that I know are more interested in the content than in how was it written. Of course, paleographers are of a different mind. They may find the handwriting itself very interesting, or maybe the paperwork, or whatever their focus of research is. But if it concerns the content, then using the platform really allows you to dig in and dig through a lot of material much quicker than you could possibly do manually. And that's the biggest gain there is. And what I also very much like is that you can exchange so much with colleagues. So if you have colleagues that work on the same period of time, or that may struggle to read through certain types of text, you can share models, or you can share the training material that you use to generate models, and you can build also models together. And that cooperative part that digital humanities and AI allow for is also something new and inspiring that I can see through using Transcribus much more than before using Transcribus.
That's great. But of course, no tool is perfect, right? So what are some of the limitations that users in these fields might face when using Transcribus?
So technology and using technology is one thing. Of course, you have to invest some time to figure out which buttons to press and which not to press. But it can make people really lazy. So they might expect the platform to entirely take over. You just upload it, press a button and be done. It's slightly more complicated than that. You really need to check what has happened or what kind of parameters you may have chosen to use or not have chosen to use. So you don't need to use all the advanced settings, but it's good to have a basic understanding, like, okay, I use that model, and that model was originally trained upon grocery lists. So that might not entirely work on religious text. Or I use this general model, which was based on political institutional text. How well will it perform on my books of religion or whatever kind of topic that you might be interested in? And then you still need to take into account that you are using resources that someone else may have used. And doing proper footnotes, if you're doing some publications, might be a good idea to just keep track of the process. But when you have used a model to transform your photos or your archival sources to machine-readable text, it's still a good idea to check whether it performs well. If you did manual transcriptions, it's still good to have a second pair of eyes to check your transcriptions. So this corrective process and keeping track of what has happened and validates the outcomes is still very important, and really does require some attention. It is not like you throw it in and you put it on the web, because that can still be problematic. But it makes the whole process a lot easier. It doesn't do it does do most of the job for you, but it doesn't do it entirely for you. So you still need, there is still a human in the loop, and that's the person pressing the button, and keeping track of that and keeping that in mind is still very important.
Yeah, I'm curious now about how it all works behind the scenes. Can you explain how machine learning models in Transcribus actually work?
Within Transcribus, there are various machine learning techniques available, or actually they are in the background, so you don't really notice. There are different kinds of models that are being trained. So we have convolutional neural networks and recurrent neural networks that are being used to train the more common types of models that every user can train. That is, the user instigates the training of a model using convolutional neural networks or the recurrent neural networks, the combination of those. The user can also use these techniques, especially the recurrent neural networks, for training tables or training fields, that is to recognize the layout on pages, so you can train models for that as well, which is different from recognizing the handwriting. So that is something that the user is enabled to do through simply clicking on buttons. There are also more advanced techniques in the background, such as the transformer models. These are very huge models based upon a technique from Microsoft. And this technique basically fine-tunes the technique that Microsoft once a year or something ago trained. And that fine-tuning, that happens by the Transcribus team. So they scoop up a lot of material. We did a large model, a transformer model, which was called the Duchess for the Dutch language, which involves Dutch. It also involves a bit of French, Latin, some German, and here and there a little bit of English. And it literally scoops together a lot of, a couple of million tokens. So, and there it is being trained upon. And that's done by the team because of the advanced technique and the server capacity that is needed to be able to train that. And then with these transformer models, or super models as we also tend to call them, you can basically throw in a text, and for the Duchess example, it's a text that is somewhat related to the Low Countries, so Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and you throw in the text, and without any training, it can be largely recognized. It might not be perfect, but it will be likely to be readable for the user already, and then you can start fine-tuning and later on build your own model. But the focus is then that it really makes the first step to get started with your text a lot easier. So there are various techniques within the platform, and depending on your choice, whether you want to train your own model or whether you want to use a basic model, which then works on the convolutional or recurrent network, or whether you want to use the super models, which is then transformer, you basically tap into a different part of the server that then employs this kind of technique to your sources.
Fascinating. Yeah. One question that often comes up is about data. How do you handle data quality issues with the transcripts you use for training the models?
So within Transcribus, a lot of projects run with various different foci. Some projects want to transcribe as is, so whatever they found on the page, they transcribe literally as they found it. So strike-throughs are being taken over. If something is inserted, they indicate that. Other projects make the choice that abbreviations are, for instance, expanded so that future users can easily find these texts or these abbreviated forms in their expanded format. One of the examples that I came across was that the word of mayor or burgemeester was being abbreviated in 16th century text, and that particular archive was pretty sure that people were never going to search for the word in the abbreviated form, so they expanded that word. So that choice they made was really documented within their project description, so that when people were looking up information on the data, they could find what choices were made, as these choices kind of influence the later outcomes if you use this kind of data within a model. So in the basic type of models that you can generate, these really influence the outcomes. So whether a certain chunk of characters is being expanded to another word that you may not recognize from this chunk of characters really influences later outcomes. So if, for instance, Roman numerals are being transcribed, it's really important to do that as the Roman numerals, because otherwise you kind of influence future outcomes. And in this particular case, there are also a lot of guidelines from experienced users that tell you, well, in some cases you need to be very careful as to how you transcribe it or not, because if later on you want to build models, then it becomes important. So the Roman numeral, the X replaced by a 10, will be disastrous if you use that material in a model, because every time the model runs into an X, it would be replaced by a 10. There are certain words where that will look really funny. So yeah, there it's really important to be very clear about the choices you've made, because it will become, or it could become, benchmark data if you decide it's that important and that it's corrected text and that all the effort you or your team has put into it could make it benchmark data, which is really important for artificial intelligence or machine learning. So that's something that people, and I see that more and more, are really giving thought as to, yeah, how do I qualify my data? So within Transcribus, when you call up a page, you will also see the status of the page, which is something for the user to decide, whether it's a page that's just done, or whether it's in the final stage, or whether it's ground truth. And with ground truth, it basically means that it has been corrected over and over and over, so that there is no error to be found anymore. Or, well, maybe you could spot one, but that's hardly possible anymore, because so much time has been spent in fine-tuning and making the most perfect kind of transcription possible.
And once users get the results, how do they interpret the outputs of the model? It is necessary to have domain expertise to analyze the prediction outputs of the models?
Knowing what went into a model, being the transcriptions, can be very helpful to predict the outcomes. So if you were training on grocery lists, it will probably not work on religious dissertations, at least with the normal models that users can train on their own. Supermodels probably function on both. Then knowing what kind of project, or maybe even who ran the project, can be really important to know about this ground truth data, or the data that was being used to create the model. So what the model then does is, when you click on it and you employ it to run on your text, it makes sense to just do 5 pages first and check whether the outcomes are really what you expected it to be. You might want to correct it, or you might want to ask someone who is more knowledgeable on the period to double check it. But if you have a bit of a sense of what it says, and that's enough for you, then that's totally fine. It depends on your question. If you just want to check what your grandparents wrote to each other, then you do not want to call in the aid of an expert. Well, does this make sense? Because that does not really require a specialist to look at. But if you are working on your dissertation on 17th century something, it might make sense to have a quick discussion with colleagues like, okay, does this make sense? Are these really words, or is this still in need of some fine-tuning? And then you can figure out where to go from there. But knowing what happened in the pre-training, so whether there were abbreviations expanded or not, or whether they transcribed as is or just did a lousy job, basically, allows you to kind of already predict whether a model is suitable for your sources and whether you can apply it to your material. With supermodels, that's kind of easy. You can just apply them to your material anyway. Might not be perfect, but you have a good start to build on for your own model. And that's more relevant for older text than for newer text. It can be really helpful to dig through some other text and become acquainted with the fact that people were creative in their spelling. I've had text that had the same word on one page written in 7 different ways through that one page. That's something you kind of need to become accustomed to when you're working with 17th century material. And becoming an expert or having an expert around in your faculty or somewhere nearby can then be really helpful to become acquainted with this kind of output and these challenges that it could offer. But it's in any case a really easy entrance to the material and to the content, and then you can figure out whether the content makes sense or not.
Thank you so much, Annemieke. It has been great to have you here today. And to our listeners, if you are curious to learn more about Transcribus and what it can do, check out their website, and see you next time.